I guess I'm default moderator here because my name is listed first, although I think that was alphabetical. I don't know.
So,
Why don't we start by introducing yourselves?
Hi, I'm Tam Chronin, and I've written several sci-fi, or not sci-fi, fantasy. The sci-fi is all short stories, but I've written several fantasy novels.
My name is Bruce Davis. I'm both fantasy and science fiction author. My publisher is Brick Cave Media. They're out of Mesa, Arizona. We're in the dealer room down there if you wish to peruse the titles. I have been publishing and self-publishing for about 20 years. Been writing all my life, and I am an avid reader. I I have about 10,000 titles on my Kindle account and read all the time.
I'm Brent Miller. I'm a sci-fi fantasy author. I brought a couple of my books to show off because I'm not in the dealer's room, but I will be here tomorrow for a signing at like 3. Anyway, yeah, I've been writing for 15 years, I guess, right? Published first when I was 16 and have just kind of fallen in love with the process ever since. Um, Not sure if it applies too much to this panel, but since Bruce mentioned being an avid reader, I'll say I'm not. Um, I've read probably 3 books in the last 5 years.
I've read 3 books in the last 5 days.
I know. But I watch a lot of TV, manga, video games, right? So I think inspiration and stories come from everywhere. So.
Hey y'all, I'm Beth Dolgner. I write paranormal cozy mysteries and romantic urban fantasy. Short and sweet.
Yeah, that was succinct.
So I guess our topic has more to do, I guess, with our ability to publish and get our work in front of eyeballs. Is the way I interpret the mandate here. How does the backlist and the availability of pretty much everything that's ever been published affect your ability as a creator, as an author, to sell your books?
And I want to throw out there, we all assumed that one of the other authors on this panel suggested this topic, but none of us did. We don't know where it came from. But hey, let's talk about our backlist.
Well, it's a valid topic. I think that as a reader, okay, I'm going to depart from my author a bit. I love the fact that if I hear about a work that maybe was published in the 50s, I can go online and find it, and I can read it. And to me, that's real value. I think that as a writer, I take a lot of inspiration from authors that have come before me, and the ability to be able to read things that are out of print, that may be hard to find, but man, you can find that on the internet and read it, know what's going on. I think is invaluable, but I'm not sure it's very helpful to me as trying to get my work in front of other people and get them interested.
Yeah. I mean, as a reader, yes. But I think the big thing is you can go back to all of these classic sci-fi and fantasy stories. So why do you want the new stuff?
Exactly.
I'm competing with Isaac Asimov.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I would say that it's not so much competing. At least that's my perspective, right? There are a wealth of readers and people who are always looking for something more, something new, and like there are things today that we can address, be it societal issues or cultural issues, changes in technology, things that Isaac Asimov never could have dreamt of. And that's not to say that he's not a profound writer, but he's writing from a different culture, and it's valuable to have that culture available to us. But I think that there's always going to be a place for new art, and we're addressing new things and new issues that arise. So I think that there's a place for both.
Yeah, I think it's, as an author, it can be overwhelming to look at a prolific author's backlist and how long it is, and think, well, I can never compete with that. But you have to start somewhere. You start that first book and just keep going, and eventually you're going to have a whole back catalog yourself. And I know for me, in the genres that I write in, there are some very prolific authors. There's one in particular who literally puts out a book every single month. I don't think she sleeps. And
Sleep is optional.
and I can get kind of like, oh my god, I can't do that. I have to sleep. I need my 8 hours. And so you kind of do get the sense of like, well, I can't keep up with that. But I also realize that the readers in my genres are avid readers. I mean, they plow through books at a pace like you do, Bruce.
Yeah.
And so if they've discovered that author and are reading her stuff, they might also cross over and read mine. So I try to view it also as that competition is good because it's also our community where there's all those entry points to bring in new readers through these various authors and these various series that other people have as well as ourselves.
Do you think the backlist hurts or helps though?
I mean, my backlist is my retirement plan.
I'm not talking about our backlist because that's our. I'm talking about. So you mentioned Asimov, or who's current? Yeah. No, I'm in your genre. I'm thinking.
Like my genre. I mean, Charlene Harris. Who's
Yeah,
a lot of
Charlene.
urban fantasy.
I'm really bad at names. Charlene Harris, or
I think there's something like the bigger names.
Yeah.
Feeling like you're in competition, but it's great when I can tell somebody, like one of my series, I say picture Murder She Wrote, but with ghosts, because almost everybody recognizes that name, Murder She Wrote. So I think sometimes having that big name and using it as an example or a comparison, I think can actually be very beneficial with the right kind of marketing.
For my Magic Law series, I say, okay, Lord of the Rings meets Law and Order.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, for me, it's Divergent and My Hero, right? We all have those things that we can pull from, but that's also like Powerless is a dystopia. There have been countless dystopia books, but for some reason, Hunger Games is the one that really brought the genre back to life for my generation, I think. And I don't need to think like, oh, how am I ever going to compete with Suzanne Collins? Like, it's not about competing. It's about like we have a shared interest.
So I guess that's my next question.
Yeah.
Is there a way that we can leverage that prolific author backlist to our own work?
I personally, I think that what we're doing is we're having a conversation with the authors we fell in love with and made us want to start.
Oh, I love
writing.
that phrasing.
Yeah, that's cool.
So we're adding to the conversation, and yes, they may have started a path, but a lot of people are going to go into, I want to read a book similar to this, but with freshness, and we can carry that torch. We can leave past prejudices behind and just build upon that and make our art better.
Anticipation. Big notes.
That's a really good point. Like you said, like it's about making our art better. It's about improving on what we've been given. And I'm trying to find a way to say this that doesn't sound arrogant because I'm really not. But like, so I'll just use anime. Dragon Ball Z is anybody who thinks that that's not one of the biggest anime in history is just not paying attention, right? You don't have to love it, but it is absolute. It's everywhere. And then My Hero has so many of those themes, so many things that Akira Toriyama made Horikoshi want to write. But now those themes, seeing the relationship between All Might and Deku as opposed to Goku and Gohan, it's worlds better. But it's not to say that it was bad in the first place. Anyway, that's an example that maybe most people don't relate to. But the point is, we can take things that, if I'm talking about Hunger Games, maybe the whole PETA and Gale situation was not for me. And I can say, okay, I love what she did. Let me see if I can tell this my way, if I can improve on it in any way, if I can try to run because she walked. It doesn't mean that I think I'm a better author than her. It just means let me take my approach. And thank her for making it so I can, right? Um,
We're all
So-
standing on the shoulders of giants.
exactly.
And I love what you said about conversation with an author you admire. I am fascinated that a very popular genre out there right now. Wow, they are loud next door, y'all. If I need to speak up, holler. A very popular genre right now is Pride and Prejudice variations,
Yeah.
where it's like, let's stick Elizabeth and Darcy in World War II. Let's stick the two of them in, this other scenario. And like authors are, I mean, having great careers just writing different versions of Pride and Prejudice. And so I think there's some fascinating ways that people can take these older works and reimagine them.
Yeah.
And it's not meant to be better than the original, but it's really an homage to say, I love this world, I love these characters. Let me take a spin on it and see what I can do.
That's interesting. I hadn't thought of it quite that way. I like your analogy of a conversation with an admired author. I guess my question is, how can we link or leverage to that particular feeling without coming across as, a copycat or borrowing from or whatever? I don't know. I mean, I have to admit right up front, I don't feel personally like I'm competing with authors. I base a lot of my own work on other works. I mean, my sci-fi series is Cowboy Bebop, but it's a fan's homage with different takes on it. But are we actually able to use that backlist, use that author conversation in a meaningful way? I don't know. I don't think I do, and I wish I knew how.
That's a really good question. Am I starting this party?
Go ahead.
I'll start this party.
Take it off.
I think for me, I very much study what other authors in my genres are doing, not for storylines, but for the tropes and things.
Yeah, mentor text if you want.
Paranormal cozy mystery. Oh my gosh, y'all! If there's not an animal involved, like a pet cat or something, readers will let you know how unhappy they are. I made that mistake, which is why my current series has a pet chupacabra. And so
I love that.
He's my most popular character ever. I'm like, really? All the humans I've written and nobody cares. When I write a chupacabra, people lose their minds. But I very much take those. I see these tropes that other authors are doing, and I think that things like having an animal in my cozy mysteries, themes like found family and starting over and building a new life, because somebody's gone through divorce or they're widowed or whatever it might be. So I think for me, it's not so much about stealing from stories, but stealing from the feelings and the themes. But I think that's how you bring readers in. I mean, those are the things they love about these books, and so I think it helps. They have an expectation when they come into a book in a certain genre.
A friend of mine who is a book coach basically helps bring your book to life, if you will. Calls that mentor text, where you read somebody else's work. You're not stealing from them, but you're seeing the way that they structure their story, the way that they structure their characters, and using that to inform your own writing. And I think that's valuable. I guess coming back to the original question, I can go read the original. Why do I want to read you?
Because I'm more fun. I don't know.
I would say that I'm more relatable at this point, right? I mean, I think again, like I mentioned, there's value to both, but if you're gonna read Brave New World, which is where I got heaps of inspiration for Powerless, right? Like Brave New World, Anthem, the greats, but they wrote from this perspective that's different than the one that we have today, and so you'll feel closer to characters who are written with the same things you're struggling with in mind. Um, at least that's what I think. But again, I think that there is a great reason to study the past and like reading Brave New World and taking that to understand Huxley as a person is incredible. And it's a way. I'm pretty sure that he passed away. I mean,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Some time ago, as a matter of fact.
I'm really bad with history, but I'm confident on that one. But it's like you said, Tam, like this is a conversation, and we can see. I don't know about you guys, but every story I write, so much of myself is poured onto those pages, and we can see that and have a conversation with people who have been long gone or people that we can't talk to every day, right? And to me, that's kind of like to stress that analogy a little bit. That's to ask why would I read you if I could read the original is like saying why would I be friends with you if I could be friends with you. Well, do both.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I didn't mean that they were
No,
mutually exclusive, but I mean the question asked in the panel, and I don't know that it's valid, is whether the backlist hurts us.
Right.
My opinion, and I am a huge fan of authors' backlists. I mean, this is for me one of the great things about the internet, about Guggenheim Project, Amazon. God, I can't remember the name of it, but it's old, now public domain authors. So we're going way back to the 20s and 30s. Is that I can read these classics for free, but I can take that and use it in my own work, either as an inspiration or as mentor text. My series tend to lean heavily toward the noir. Okay. Raymond Chandler in space, if you will.
That's a great tagline.
Right.
I love that. Yes.
And so as mentor text, they're great. I'm a prolific reader. It's always on here or somewhere, so that I'm mixing both these older, classics that we can get online, the backlist, as it were. But I'm looking for taglines that take me to new authors. And one of the things that I really love about a number of book sites, Goodreads, Amazon, they will say, "You read this. Would you like to read this?" And I'll look at it and say, "Hell yeah, I'd like to read that." And so I don't think I buy into the premise that seemed to be set here, is that the backlist hurts us. I think the backlist helps us.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, it helps, and it, like you guys are talking about inspiration, which is far less shameless than me, I suppose, because I steal. I mean,
right. What did Hotline say? File the numbers off of it and present it as your own.
Right? No,
I steal all the time.
Like one of my favorite scenes I've ever written was directly taken from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I'm just like, that is beautiful. Let me see if I can do something there.
The last scene of My Thieves' Prophet book, which is my science fiction series, is Raymond Chandler's The Big Sleep. When Eddie Mars gets shot by his own man. I mean, it's just shamelessly stolen and presented it by Owen.
But it does help us, and it gives us these avenues to tell our stories. Right. So yeah, I agree. I think that where I can see this coming from is more from people like me who might read a book in a year and feel proud of it, right? And this year, the book that I have tackled is Island by Aldous Huxley.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, in that case,
you're reading classics. I can't criticize you at all.
But at the same time, that does mean that people like me probably will not buy books from recent authors, but maybe that's not your target audience then, right?
I don't know. I mean, people talk a lot about target audience, and I never really thought very much about it. I write what I'd like to read personally.
Right.
I think we all do in some sense. And I use those classics, those old authors, as a jumping off.
Yeah.
And I love your analogy about having a conversation that captures.
my case, I write LGBT themed, several themes, and you don't find that a lot in the classics because of all the censorship from the early 1900s. So, I mean, you couldn't have uh, Gandalf and Aragorn in a relationship back when Tolkien was writing. So, um, that's, I mean, that's one of the reasons I do like the backlist is somebody wants these old themes, these old feelings, but they want to feel themselves in the story.
Right.
And that's what I want to do.
But see, that's kind of what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You take these as a jumping off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Read some of the old ones.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
You know, if you want LGBTQ
Absolutely.
themes, it's amazing. And I guess that's part of the point. I don't think human nature has changed.
Right.
You can go back and read Ovid and find things that resonate today. One of my favorite authors of all time is Marcus Tullius Cicero. He wrote in 53 BC on the good life. And there's so much in there that you could take and transplant today,
Yeah.
and it would not look out of place.
That's always interesting to see, like, tropes like the hero's journey, found family, right? These things that always will matter to us, things that just for some reason as humanity we hold core values, and then we see things like I mentioned somewhere, but Terminator, right? So we've got Skynet taking over the world, and it's terrifying. That nobody would have written that story in 53 BC. That wouldn't have made sense. But maybe they would have written about aliens or a foreign invader, and the core themes there. I mean, we're reskinning it with today's issues, but they're always going to be these things that.
If you're at all interested, I'm a super history nerd.
Sure.
I would recommend an author called Marcus Didio Falco, who wrote from the perspective of a conquered person. He was get this wrong, Ligurian. He was on the Italian peninsula, but his people were conquered by Rome, and it's like Skynet or the Nazis.
Right.
I mean, the themes are all there, and this is like 150 BC.
Right.
So I guess my point is, human nature has not changed. So we can take these backlist authors. We can take, your Kim Stanley Harris.
Charlene Harris.
Harris, yeah. I'm mixing her up with somebody else.
Also, Kim Harrison, yeah.
Kim
She
Harrison,
writes urban
yeah.
fantasy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
those are all kind of the same genre. You can take anybody, any relationship, and I don't care if it's gay or straight, relationships are relationships, and we can combine all these things as authors and produce our own work.
Yeah.
So I have a question for all of you then. We're talking about kind of your own works compared to that's already out there existing in the world, but when you are writing a new book, like whatever your current manuscript is, do you feel any sort of pressure from your previous works to have similar themes or to be totally different perhaps? I mean, do you have any kind of a sense of that relationship between your own books?
Well, it depends on whether you're talking about a series or a standalone.
Yeah.
So
then do you prefer series or standalone?
Plead the fifth. So I have two series, but each of the books in the series is essentially a standalone. It's not a continuous trilogy or anything like that. I hate those. I hate cliffhanger. That's just
agreed. I'm not.
preference.
Yeah, I get frustrated.
So there is pressure to be consistent within that world. On the other hand, if I'm writing a standalone, it often comes down to either a moral dilemma or oftentimes, oh, hey, I read this book by burrows. And it's, a little dated and it's a little crude, but I can take this idea and move this forward. And now all of a sudden, like you said, we're writing for a contemporary audience.
Yeah.
So I don't feel pressure to be consistent across works. My series are very different.
Right.
But I do feel consistency within a series if I'm writing a series, even if it's a series of standalone books.
Yeah. I personally, I'm similar, I think. I mean, I love series, so everything I write, I fall in love with the characters, and I can't let them go after one book. But I do try to avoid cliffhangers where possible, because for the same reason, I don't want to be like, hey, wait a year, and then,
Well, I have waited several
years, yeah,
for the series to
right,
be finished,
right,
so I could read it all.
But yeah, I don't think that I feel pressure per se to explore different themes or to keep with the same ones. I just write what I want, and then what I want tells, like, these themes are just core to who I am as a person and what I'm facing at the time. Like, Cursed explores leadership and what it means to love, and then Powerless is kind of the same things, I guess. But these are just things that I have cared about my whole life.
Right.
So, but I don't, like, this is first person present and this is third person past. Like, I have no genre ties, nothing. So yeah, I kind of,
A little off subject, but how do you, when you're writing and you're getting your tone, your voice, does that just come to you, or is it, man?
I with Powerless, I fought it so hard. I I hate reading first person present. I always have. It's just a personal preference. And so Cursed I wrote first. I wrote that in third person past tense, and Powerless comes along and it's just brewing in my head, right? And I write it out in third person past tense. And I felt so far from Carson. And, I just couldn't, as the author, I couldn't connect with him. I'm like, readers won't feel who he is.
Mm-hmm.
And so I rewrote it in first person present, and it felt right. And I asked like 5 people, I'm like, can you tell me which of these is better? Just hoping everyone would pick the first one. And nobody did.
It was so valid.
Yep.
How about you, Jen? Do you plan it, or do you just let it? Is that how the voice comes to you?
I always have an idea of a character that I want to put across, and then that character has to start speaking to me, or I can't finish the first chapter. So each of them do end up different. When I was writing, okay, so I'm wrapping up the series right now. The pressure is really bad stuff. But my series, I've got 2 of the books, will be 3 of them in first person, past tense. And then the prequels that I'm writing concurrently are in past tense, third person. And then I've got another series that's in first person, present tense.
What else you bet?
So I learned a very valuable lesson. My first series did pretty well. It was romantic urban fantasy. And the next 2 books I published were standalone young adult books that just never got a lot of traction. And looking back now, I realized because they were so very different from my first series. So when the next 2 series that I wrote, I focused very much on what made people feel good about that first series that was so successful. So I don't worry so much about like the storylines or anything like that. I think about how I want my reader to feel, because I think they fell in love with the feeling more than the story. At least in my genres, that tends to very much be the case. Paranormal cozy mysteries are supposed to be the literary version of a hot cup of tea and a fuzzy blanket. And that's what I want to give my readers. So the stories can be very different from each other, but at the end of the day, I want that feeling to be the same for them.
That's interesting, because I have a totally different approach, and so.
But I think because you write sci-fi, so I think it's a little bit. it's a little bit different. I think the rules are different for every genre, or
Yeah.
the expectations are different for every genre.
That's true.
Which is, I mean, how many of you out there are here writers yourselves? So I don't know if you've also discovered this, but I think, you know, knowing your genre very well, it makes a huge difference. And I'm sure you read a ton of sci-fi. I read a ton of cozy mysteries and urban fantasy. It's really interesting how each genre has its own personality. I love that.
It's funny because I read a lot. I read your genre,
Thank
and
you.
I enjoy it. It's not what I would write, but every once in a while I just want that warm blanket and cup of tea, and it's fun and it's enjoyable, and they're usually shorter works.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm not a big fan of epic fantasy because it's so freaking long. I mean,
It's a
God,
commitment.
what are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
But I love sci-fi. I love urban fantasy. I have very little patience with George R. Martin style
Oh man.
multi-book epic fantasy. Now let me just clarify that. George never finished anything. He sucked me in with After the Festival. He screwed me with Wild Cards, and then he just followed on with Song of Ice and Fire. And I said, "No, George, you're not doing this to me again."
Full chapter on what kind of armor the guy was wearing.
Yeah. Well, but it comes down to one of the reasons I wrote my fantasy novels is, don't you people ever think, why is it 5,000 years and you're still in the medieval period?
Mm-hmm.
Our medieval period lasted maybe 300 years, and there were tremendous advances that people don't really recognize that happened during that time.
That's something I try to cover in my books, actually.
And so I said, well, okay, let's take all this medieval stuff, but let's move a few hundred years in the future. And all of a sudden we're in a modern world, but we're still the same thing. So, yeah, there are rules for particular genres. But I think they have more to do with theme
Yeah.
than with the actual story.
Yeah. And
So
it's fascinating.
just reinforcing your point that it's
genres can change over time too. Like when my first series came out, it was paranormal romance. I don't know if any of y'all read paranormal romance. That genre has gotten really spicy, y'all. Like real spicy. And I was like, my books are not that.
Yeah.
They are too sweet for that genre anymore, which is why I rebranded them as romantic urban fantasy. So it's interesting how things do evolve over time. But yeah.
Just a
So I'm finishing up my first paranormal, and it's called I Ghost, and the main character is a ghost. So I've written all of the ghost narrative first person present, but then all of the interactions are third person past. Keeping that straight,
it's an interesting choice.
God, it's hard.
We'll
Yeah, I think that would
talk
break my
later
brain.
about why you made that choice because I'm not sure I understand it.
Yeah.
I have a problem with authors who switch perspectives during during a book. I find it confusing
I get
and
into my
disturbing.
character, so I am in my character, and being dead was really hard.
Yeah, I've written first person past, first person present, and then I guess you'd call it third person past, and then head hopping multiple character past. I forget what they call that. There's a term for it, but it's also past tense. Of them all, I find first person present the most difficult tone to
But
sustain.
it's
Oh, I
also
bet.
very effective.
Oh yeah.
Very
It does.
effective.
I find it very hard
But it's hard.
to sustain it for a book and to even read a book. I've used it mainly for short stories, where I find it, and sometimes it's just, no, this is how I hear this character. It's got to be first person present. It's hard to do for a whole book.
Yeah, it is. And I find myself constantly, even in Powerless, I go back. That's the beauty of self-publishing, because I'll go back because there will be a couple times in this book where I used a past tense verb and I'm like, oh, sorry. But that's
Edit.
right. But
Yeah.
that's the way we tell stories, right? Like
Yeah,
here, I just said I used a past tense verb.
Yeah.
I didn't
think
say I
we're all
right?
storytellers
Right.
naturally.
Yeah.
But when we tell our stories, it's usually, oh, this is what happened,
Yeah.
not what's happening now.
We have a couple more questions.
Go ahead.
Well, you're talking so much about the first book I tried writing, I actually wrote a third person present tense.
That's hard.
I mean, to me, it worked because when it's present tense, it's more meaningful, right? And it's sort of, I kind of think sort of like as I've had people read my stuff and say it's very cinematic. It's always the term.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I think very much kind of the films, I'm very painting things, so you're kind of going through it and it's happening. So in that case, I mean, I write in all the different tenses, but sometimes I write that way. But I was wondering, have you guys ever tried writing third person present tense?
I've tried it and abandoned it. It's not for me. But I think when you're talking to an author about how they write, that's a very personal. This is your process. Your process is your own process.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't. For me, I find that the only like again, this is because I don't like present tense. So the only reason I would use present tense is if I'm trying to put you in the head of one person and keep you there and make you feel like you're going through the journey with them. So for me, it doesn't make sense to do that in a third person story because I'm giving you distance from the character, but proximity to the events, and that feels weird to me. But again, like Bruce was saying, it is completely a personal journey, and I would never discourage somebody from trying something. But
I didn't mean to be discouraging.
No,
it's just
yeah,
very hard for me
yeah,
to write that way.
yeah,
I can do first person present for a short period of time. But again, we're talking, 5,000 to 7,000 word short stories, and that's about all I can tolerate.
that's all I got.
Yeah.
I like you. I write as if I'm writing a television show or movie
Yes.
or whatnot. So when you're watching it, it is happening as you're watching.
Mhm.
So I can definitely see how third person present tense would work for that. But
Yeah.
as a writer, it is also kind of jarring because it's not something you normally see. But I like the fact that it's an option.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely something you see if you're writing scripts or RPG.
Yes.
I was just
Or
thinking
Neil
it sounds a lot like a
Stephenson.
script. You're talking about it being like film or TV. There is like a script quality because it is that urgent, it's happening now
Yeah.
kind of feel. And I've never tried writing in present tense, and I think part of that is because I do a lot of oral storytelling. Like I was a ghost tour guide, I give a lot of lectures on various subjects, and so I have always done my oral storytelling in past tense. And so when I write, it is natural for me to write as if I am telling a story to an audience. And so I think that's partly why I've never been tempted to try present tense.
I guess it depends on who your personal narrator is, who you think of as telling the story. Yeah. And a lot of times when I'm doing the third person present tense, I'm in the character's head, so I could just as easily switch to first person present tense, but I'm maintaining that a little bit of distance.
Yeah.
And allows me to kind of describe things in a way. So if it's from a character's perspective, they're going to be writing about things the way they see it, the way they perceive it. But that can be somewhat limiting. Let's say I want to have a broader vision. So if I switch to third person, then I can have a broader vision. I can still be in their head at the same time.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's completely.
From a craft standpoint, that's a way to approach it.
Yeah.
You got to be real careful with your transitions, though, or you confuse your reader, and particularly in present tense. If you're seeing from one character's perspective and then another character's perspective, particularly of the same event, it's very effective to show that they see the same event differently. But it can get very confusing, for the reader unless you're very good at that head hopping switch. Otherwise, it just becomes kind of a muddle.
It's kind of like for me. I always, whenever I write
Yeah.
And that's a good way to separate them so the reader knows that, okay, now we're talking about Joe, not Jim, and all that kind of stuff. I've read authors that I found very confusing because they do that in the middle of a chapter, or even in the middle of a paragraph.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a minute.
I did that.
What I started doing was when I'm doing the story from the ghost perspective, first person present, the first statement is in italics, and that's the signal you're in that person.
Well, even if you're just switching tenses,
And that happens.
it can be a little bit jarring, but you get used to that.
That's right. And then they pull out, and you're in third person, and now you're in another scene.
Now, are these events going on contemporary, or using the ghost perspective now, and this is the past
they're
story?
Not happening at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. So that's.
So if you're in the first person, that person is in the event, whatever it is, and then another event occurs, and you're out of it.
Yeah.
And I would use that. No, please. Like I would use that as okay. So to express things that the main character isn't there for, right? So the first person character is experiencing this thing, but you still have to introduce that element that they have absolutely nothing. They know nothing about.
Right.
The reader still needs to know that. So then I would switch to a different scene, and they were like, okay.
Yeah, but again, that's a transition that needs to be handled very carefully, or it becomes muddled.
I think. Sorry.
You had a
Go
question?
ahead. No, it's okay.
You're on the panel, please.
I was just saying a great example of kind of switching between third person past and first person present is Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy.
Yes.
Because he does a great job where Thrawn internalizes like his observations of what's happening, and that is first person present. That's a really great use of that.
I would also advocate in the same genre, Mike Stackpole's I, Jedi.
Oh
He does a lot of the same thing.
Yeah.
The only first person present is that main character, the ghost.
And the same way in the Thrawn trilogy, it's really what.
Over to third person.
Yeah, you're describing the events going on around him, or it preceded.
Yeah, it can be a very effective storytelling tool. Absolutely.
It's just hard.
Just keeping that straight is hard.
Yeah,
I can imagine.
It's very good. You had a question?
And if you answer this in both, a couple minutes late. But with attention being sort of an economy, there's so many things vying for your attention. There's so many things you can watch. Like readers are a small enough slice, let alone read my stuff. And, I drive for Amazon. I'm in a metal box 10 hours a day, and what I pick to listen to as far as audiobooks is stuff that has stood the test of time. Like this has been going for hundreds of years. Of course, I want to read it. It's sort of passed that litmus test. And I guess it's kind of a two-part. Like, not only how do you compete with those things as a writer, but how do I get better as a reader at reading stuff that's not hundreds of years old?
Oh boy,
because that's a real blind spot.
That's the real core of this whole theme. And back around because we got a little off track.
I was gonna say,
number one, I would always advocate, if you're a reader, to try to go back to the roots of whatever genre you're interested in. Sometimes it's dated, sometimes it doesn't work in present times, but it kind of lays the ground rules, like you were talking about expectations. So, if you're gonna get into cerebral mysteries, start with Sherlock Holmes.
See, that's interesting because I almost did the reverse. That's where I start. Like I went from Sword and Stone and worked my way back to like Jeffrey Monmouth sort of.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah, I think it's funny because, like you mentioned, attention is a commodity, and it's kind of funny because I think for the past 20-ish minutes, we have not been on this panel's topic.
Yes, you're absolutely
Sorry,
right.
y'all.
We have attention deficit problems.
So there's proving that right there. But yeah, I would say that as a writer, I'm not too concerned because I value what the past has to give, and we kind of talked about using that to guide what we're writing, but also the themes persist forever, and there's something beautiful in I'm telling a story that honestly somebody told 200 years ago with a different coat of paint, right? And but we all still care about these things to the core of our beings, and um, so I don't think of it as competition. I think of it as this world that we're all sharing. And then as a reader, I don't read. So
Get into audiobooks.
get in.
Brent.
I know.
Get into audiobooks.
I listen to The Witcher. It's so good. But the but first off, this is probably gonna get me in trouble. But old doesn't mean good, and new doesn't mean good.
That's the thing.
It's true.
Really good. Like just
Yeah.
because it's been like when you walk into a class and they go, "This is a masterpiece of literature."
Right.
You know how you're supposed to feel about it.
Yeah.
Before you even.
And
Well,
yeah.
number one, pay no attention to what your teachers told you, because there's a lot of stuff that's pushed as masterpieces that, frankly, is crap.
Except Brave New World. That's good.
And I
Well, I would go even further to, who cares what Holden Caulfield thinks?
I would say that for you as a reader, I mean, I do this myself. If there's a book I really love, I think about what is it that I love about it.
Yeah.
Do I love the way it makes me feel? Do I love the story of somebody overcoming hardship? Do I love the romance? And so look for those kinds of themes in other authors' works. If the description mentions one of those things or multiple things that you love about it, then that might be a good bet. Like, oh, I should try this because this might make me feel a similar way when I read it. And I realize I talk about feelings a lot with writing books.
But you're right about feelings,
Right.
Beth.
Cozy mysteries.
No, but
So don't let anybody tell you what you should like.
Absolutely.
I'm one of those absolute weirdos
Absolutely.
who adores Moby Dick.
Yeah,
Most
that is
everybody else in the world hates that novel. I love it. I've read it 3 or 4 times, but I'm weird. Okay, just accept it. That's the way it is.
My husband's favorite novel is not one of mine. No, of course not. He absolutely is still in love with Les Miserables to the point where he has contemplated learning French just
Just
so
to
he
read
can
it.
read it.
Yeah.
every day.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
love the man.
Yes.
But like
I've wanted to learn Latin so I can read Cicero.
I'm learning Japanese to read My Hero.
Yeah.
It's
I almost did that for Cardcaptor Sakura. Oh my God.
so close. But you mentioned that you talk a lot about feelings, and that's true. But a lot of that is applied to tropes as well. It's just different words,
100%. Yep.
But like, so, I mentioned probably at this panel, I don't remember anymore. But the hero's journey is something that I write a lot. I just love that feeling, right? But that whole trope, the whole like starting from something small and growing into someone great and changing the world and all of this that really resonates. And we have ancient stories like the Epic of Gilgamesh that tells that journey, and then we have books that have been written in the past, I don't know, 3 years. Like I can't think of any examples, but just kidding.
Okay, Star Wars. Your favorite analogy
I love
is
Star
the
Wars.
hero's
It
journey.
is. Oh.
But getting back to your point, I think Tam made the point earlier. We're not necessarily competing with those older authors. We're, she said, having a conversation with them.
If anything, yeah.
Basing what we do on what they did.
And so from our perspective as writers, it's they've given us something to start with and kind of laid groundwork for us. But they've also, so many of those classic writers have inspired people to read, and there are people who would never read if they didn't pick up something from 100 years ago. So they're, if anything, they're helping us reach people who then might read our books too.
You guys talked a lot about having that conversation, like, oh, I love what you're saying here, I want to build on it. Have you ever read something or watched something that you're like, I hate everything good, but make a whole
Yes.
world about funny.
Yes.
I have written an entire book
Yeah.
that, is basically, I hate Steinbeck. And it will never see the light of day because it's so awful. But it's like, no, I'm sorry. I hate everything you've written.
I used to write fanfic on exactly that premise. If there was something that, like an episode of an anime that I absolutely hated, I had to just do over. This is stupid. We're going to not necessarily fix it, but make it interesting.
I'm thinking the old short Godzilla versus Bambi.
No, I've done, for me it's themes. It's like, and okay, everybody else is saying things that'll get them in trouble, so I'll do it too. George R.R. Martin, he may be a phenomenal writer. I don't know. But the themes that he presents just sit in every wrong way with me, right?
Kicks ass. What a
It's
world.
it's and so for me, I'm like, no, maybe it's okay to have hope and to be a good person and to have honor. And so yeah, I definitely like react really harshly to these things. I'm like, well, I'm gonna write a character who is so good that
I don't know about that reaction. That gets boring too. But yes, you're spot on about Mark. Anybody else? You had a comment?
I forgot what it was.
It's okay. We're kind of loose and free form here anyway.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think we've said it many times throughout this panel, but I consider like the backlist like analogy like cars, right? Every certain decade or whatnot, all the cars look vaguely the same.
Yeah.
Remember where cube cars were like the thing, but like
Remember the fins?
yes, the fins. And so that was like the standard. That's sort of like the backbone. And then like sure they all had fins, but not every car had fins like this. Right? Or
Our fins are special.
like the window was like this on this cube car. And I'm like, okay, cool, great. I can see around this corner, but I can't see around that corner. So like what? But people like variations on a theme is very important. Like that they build that backbone. So the more you go back and the more you can go back to see how that trope has evolved over time. So I don't think necessarily it is competing or even getting lost in the backlist. It is what is in the backlist that I can cobble together and put it in my blender and then make it something else that I can contribute to this backlist.
Yeah.
Bruce, you read a lot. I read a lot. What we read influences what we write. It just
I gotta say, for me, I'm going way back. So a lot of my themes are kind of updated noir detective. I love Hammett. I love Chandler. Travis McGee.
Okay.
I will go back to those old themes again and again, but change them around and bring them forward into my sci-fi.
but those themes still are in your head.
Oh yeah. I mean, frankly, I stole the last scene from The Big Sleep and punked it down in my
I love
novel.
it.
It's like that's exactly the same. It's just different names. My fantasy series was written more as a reaction to what I said before. Why are we stuck in medieval times for thousands of years? Are you people stupid? Don't you think and invent stuff? Now, a good fan theory that I read recently about Tolkien, and the reason that through multiple ages it's all the same. The elves are actively suppressing technology. If you live forever, you don't want anything to change.
And to add to what you said, if you're absolutely right. I tell people I was raised watching Scooby-Doo and reading the Bunnicula books.
Yeah.
And that is the kind of style I write with today. Is a little silly, a little humor, but also the paranormal elements. So it absolutely influenced me.
So I got to read this because I love Bunnicula.
I love Bunnicula so much.
Bunnicula is one of my favorites.
It's probably not necessarily in your consciousness.
No, not at all. It wasn't until I was having a discussion on a panel at a different con, and I went, "Oh, this explains so much."
I get it
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, thing that there are no new stories?
Yeah,
It's all been
there-
written
there's
before.
there's like 6 plots in the entire world, and they're all variations on the same thing. That
We have
was
time for one more question.
Yeah, just on the set. When we talk about competing, I mean, what I mean is I have 24 hours in a day.
Yep.
I'm going to spend some amount of it reading this over everything.
Yeah, and
I don't. I think if I'm understanding your question, we can't compete.
Yeah, exactly.
We have to write stories that we love, that we feel good about, that we write with integrity and honesty. But you can't compel somebody to read your
Yeah.
book.
that's the best way to put it. Is like if I'm competing financially, I will lose. And there it has to be about I put out something that I think makes the world better. You know.
Yeah, I guess the back half of this question is
Yeah.
more modern stuff is more accessible. Like the language is more accessible, even though it's the same universal human themes. It's like you're gonna love that whether it's 200 years ago or today. How do you tap into the universal themes of Cicero or Seneca or Homer or whatever, but sort of leveraging the accessibility you have of talking in the same language?
Yeah. One thing that helps me is I'm just starting this, and I'll see how it goes. I have an ad campaign that I'm starting that is like Carson talking to you. So I have like first off video. Homer didn't have that, but also, but you kind of get a feeling for who this character is. So that's kind of my hope to leverage of like this is how he talks. If you want a story of somebody who sounds like this is a good place to go.
I guess I'm a little more attuned to taking that older language, what we consider more stilted, and updating it. So one of my favorites is Cicero's quote that never treat with dishonest men. You're both dishonored by the process, but they have nothing to lose. Okay? If you lie down with pigs, you get muddy.
So I've tried to read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Oh, same. I do too.
I could not read it.
Really?
And it had to do with the audience. Verne was writing to people to educate them
Right.
and have a story. I don't care what the Latin names of all those damn fish were.
Okay. And so that's how you and I are different readers. That's why I love Moby Dick. And most people hate it. But I'm into that detail. Oh my goodness, this is world building at its best.
The story is great, this is happening, and it's not a new story.
Right.
But his audience that he was writing to is so different from the audience that we write to today.
I like reading those old classic ghost stories or listening to those old classic ghost stories, and the language is so high. Like they put in those $50 words and it's taken out of the story. Like, I don't think people really talk about this or talk like this. I think it's just like they get paid by the word. So
well,
that.
there are both sides to that. If you read contemporary letters from the time, I'm writing to my wife. Yeah, they actually talked like that. It was a very, if you were lettered, you weren't just, somebody who barely could write their name. If you'd been to school and were lettered, you tended to use that language. It was a much more emotive and sentimental time than it is now. So yeah, people really did write like that. They may not have talked like that one-on-one when they were in conversation, but writing a letter was a whole different thing. It was actually a thing. And so that's actually not inaccurate. It's just hard for us from our contemporary perspective, where we don't write letters anymore. We just text people.
Oh, well. So
Yeah.
I've got a friend in our editing group who writes period mysteries.
Yeah.
Every day she reads the New York Times from 1850
Exactly.
something or other.
Yeah.
Okay. So her work is extremely accurate as to what's going on and how they talk into the events, and people love it. Me, I don't love it.
You've got to have a certain mindset. I do a lot of historical research and
Thank
always
you.
try to go back to original sources. And sometimes it's a bit, hard to handle.
Yeah.
But sometimes I just love some of these old time insults.
Oh.
I mean, it's just, it's
Oh,
an
yeah.
art form.
They
So
are such
Yeah.
zingers.
Yeah.
You know,
we're
Lord Russell was beloved by everyone except his closest
All right.
friends.
we have to wrap up, guys, but because I think people are coming in for the
Yeah.
next thing. But
Thanks,
we're
everybody.
all-
thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you very much.